In Sarasota, Florida today, a 29-year-old 𝐋𝐄𝐀𝐑𝐍 this morning
pulled out a gun and shot herself in the head while the program was on the air.
The woman, CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK, was taken to the hospital in critical condition. Ms. Chubbuck wrote and starred in a half-hour daily show called the Suncoast Digest on station WXLT-TV.
Seconds before shooting herself, Ms. Chubbuck told WXLT-TV viewers,
"In keeping with the WXLT practice of presenting the immediate and complete reports of local 𝐻𝐿 news, TV40 presents what is believed to be a telegraphical first. In living color, exclusive coverage of an offended suicide."
Portugal, 1979. In the good style of the mega-popular British newspapers known as Red Top Tabloids, a new publication emerges. Correio da Manhã. Translation: Morning Mail. With its population breathing freedom again for less than 5 years at this point, after a grueling censoring dictatorship that lasted for a little more than 40, the sensationalist and populist nature of this daily periodic was not only more than well accepted, but also vehemently embraced, with the newspaper quickly becoming the national sales champion. Portugal, 2013. In an era already dominated by the new technologies and with the paper format becoming obsolete by the day, losing its ground to the digital ones, the company behind CM felt the need to advance for the next natural step. And that's how a new medium based on its big brother was born, the television channel known as CMTV. The medium could be new, but its delivery format was immutable. Entertainment programming, celebrity gossip, sports sections, and even erotic content, just like the one found in the central pages of the paper-made sibling. But the selling point of this TV channel was precisely the same as the printed format: the news. Lots of them. The more scandalous, the finer. And better yet, the more violent, the finer. The more destructive, the finer. The bloodier, the finer. The more sadistic, the finer. The more morbid, the finer. To the point where, at least in Portugal, the CMTV initials became unofficially synonymous with sensationalism before a tragic situation in the midst of the usual "please someone call the police", "please someone call the paramedics", "please someone call the firefighters". That newest voice, echoing from that corner over there, joined them by yelling, "Please someone call CMTV". Due to this fame, or infamy, of being sensationalistic, and despite the channel's high ratings and popularity, several voices, especially notable ones, were raised in protest against the station, including the most notable of them all.
Boa tarde, Ronaldo, em direto para a CMTV. Queria-lhe perguntar, Rui
Para
Patrícia...
onde?
CMTV.
Que é isso, CMTV? Então esqueça, que eu não vou responder.
Sobre o jogo com a Dinamarca.
Não vale a pena.
No, trust me, this notable voice really despises CMTV.
Ronaldo, preparado para este jogo hoje?
But you may be asking by this point, what does this mega popular in Portugal, but pretty much obscure to the rest of the world channel, have to do with our entry of today? My point is very simple. Firstly, due to my nationality, this is the reality I'm very aware of on a daily basis. But what I'm really trying to demonstrate is how this sensationalistic phenomenon, that in the English-speaking world even goes by the slogan "if it bleeds, it leads", is absolutely not new at all. Even if we go back as much as we want, decade-wise, wherever country we choose, we will certainly come across it somehow. And the other thing we will also come across is the dissident voices. The voices rising in protest against the instinctive human nature for the cruel and the macabre, and also against the agents that are quickly ready to serve humanity such delicacies on a silver platter. Those voices manifest in distinct ways, also obtaining distinct results. But one thing is, if the manifestation occurs, in a relatively peaceful manner, even comical, such as the act of throwing a microphone into a lake, live on air, something that can eventually be recoverable.
Dois mergulhadores que tiveram mesmo de saltar para dentro do lago pela segunda vez para poder encontrar o microfone.
Whereas another different thing is throwing your entire life away, live on air. If we go back a few decades, to the mid-70s to be exact, and if we jump from the European continent to the North American one, most precisely to the small and also somewhat obscure city of Sarasota in the state of Florida, which personally only entered my radar of knowledge thanks to pro wrestler Macho Man Randy Savage, who was always announced as hailing from there. We will find a way more catastrophic case of protest against the "if it bleeds, it leads" mantra. One that, unfortunately, fell into the pit of irreversibility. Another considerable difference compared to the way Ronaldo protested is that here, this voice didn't even hate the station she was criticizing. Quite the contrary, in fact, as she could even be often found walking back and forth along its corridors and studios in a very relaxed manner, keeping in mind that she actually happened to work there. She criticized the channel exactly for the opposite reason, because she loved it and therefore wished it the best. Constructive criticism on steroids. On the other hand, despite all the tragedy we will learn throughout this documentary, this voice of protest, for better or for worse, made history forever, as it was the very first voice that deliberately silenced herself for good in such a violent and gruesome manner on live TV. This is the tormented story of CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK. But who was CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK after all? How exactly did the tragic act she committed occur? For the hopefully very few who may have never heard of her, and for the one who may know little more about her other than the appalling event involving her on the morning of the 15th of July 1974 at the WXLT-TV Channel 40 studios. That's exactly there where we will begin our coverage of this whole chronicle. But let's be fully honest and straightforward. Chris Chubbuck may have inhabited this earth for almost 30 years, but it's thanks to this day and this day only that you landed on this video. You know it, I know it, we know it. So, as a mere and mortal human being, instinctively hungry for the macabre and the morbid as you are, let's satisfy that need of yours forthwith. Even if the Cristianos and the Christines of this world, or the other one, complain out loud. And please, don't even feel sorry for this hunger of yours. You are just human, I am just human, we are just human. Never forget about that. It was a sunny Monday in the Sunshine State, and CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK woke up soon for another supposed week of ambitious and diligent work. After stretching her whole slim figure from head to toe throughout her princess-styled bed, a canopy bed that seemed more suited for a teenager rather than a woman about to join the 30s club the next month, Chris drank the morning breakfast in the company of Mother Peg, with whom she was still living in a summer house in Siesta Key, a small paradisiac island in the Sarasota area with a great view to the Gulf of Mexico. The quick conversation topics on that morning were probably trivial ones. Perhaps they talked about the medical appointment her grandparents, specifically her grandfather, who lived across the street, had for that morning. Perhaps they discussed the black and white printed dress she chose to wear. Or maybe her mother chose for her to host that morning's half-an-hour TV show Suncoast Digest that CHRISTINE began hosting last September at the local generalist channel WXLT-TV Channel 40, an ABC affiliate that would later change call signs to WWSB in 1986. A show that her grandparents rarely missed, with one of the exceptions being precisely that morning, due to her grandfather's appointment. He was driven to the medical facility by her grandmother, which means none of them was home. Please keep this piece of information for later on, okay? Certainly they talked about perspicacity, Christine's chocolate poodle that her mother should keep an eye on while Chris was out, although Christine was very clear in assuring her hippie-style mum that the dog sitting wasn't supposed to last past 10:45, as she would surely be back by then. After the last hurried sip, Christine left. Mother Peg was far from imagining that it would be forever. Only Chris knew. Christine drove from home to the studios on her yellow Volkswagen Beetle, a trip that, discounting traffic, can be made in about 5 minutes. Speaking of 500 houses was normally the average viewership for her little local show. On good days, maybe 1,000. But it didn't matter. Christine Chubbuck would conduct her little boy with the same proficiency and professionalism usual on her, whether the audience was 500 or 5 million households. It was her space, her moment, her contribution. The program consisted of a talk show where out of the ordinary people related to the local community of Sarasota and surrounding areas had the opportunity to get a few minutes of exposure in the form of an interview conducted by Christine, showing what they were known for, their craft, or simply some extraordinary activity they enjoyed doing. Occasionally, the show also featured some outside reports with a similar formula, whose filmed footage would then be shown during the 30-minute telecast. But there was something unusual on that particular episode of the show. A news segment. WXLT, just like any ordinary generalist TV channel, featured news programs and segments that they would call News Watch, whose lettering was even clearly displayed on the front of their typical newscast desk. Some of them, especially on casual weekends, would even be anchored by Christine Chubbuck herself. However, unlike the outside reports, those news segments had never been included before in her Suncoast Digest program. But all of that, according to Christine herself, was about to change starting that morning. From that Monday onward, Suncoast Digest was supposed to open with a small 5-minute newscast segment covering a summary of the local trendy news. If we think about it, it actually made sense, as for many, that would be their first contact with the local news of that day. This is actually very common nowadays with morning talk shows and whatnot, at least here. Christine had informed the previous week maybe a couple of co-workers about the change of format to debut that following Monday, such as, for example, creative director Denver Baker, who on that particular morning was in charge of the audio. Nevertheless, they acted accordingly and proceeded with the necessary changes. Christine Chubbuck was a heck of a professional, so she certainly knew what she was doing. Not even Gordon Galbraith, the show's director, who was expected to approve any format change beforehand, opposed the idea, trusting her more than attested and acclaimed professionalism. Their major change in routine ended up being just rearranging the set accordingly for this new segment. 2 cameras were used in the studio for Christine's show, both operated by females, a rarity at the time. The explanation for that was really simple. As most live broadcasts on Channel 40 aired that night, the male camera operators, always having in mind how little they were paid, simply refused to wake up that early for a morning show. And this is how the tradition of having women behind the cameras for the WXLT morning talk shows began. Women who were already working for the station in other functions. During the day and not at night, I suppose. A tradition that started on the talk show hosted by Guy Pascal, a predecessor of Suncoast Digest that debuted in 1972 and used to occupy the same time slot. One of the cameras, operated on that morning by 24-year-old Linda Shea Taylor, to whom Christine Chubbuck was constantly trying to find a boyfriend. Oh, the irony. Was locked on the regular set, where a local meteorologist and his wife, who had since arrived, were awaiting the moment it would be turned on in order to be interviewed by Christine as that day's guests. There was also another guest scheduled for that morning, 𝐋𝐄𝐀𝐿 from the Bradenton District Office of the Florida Division of Forestry. Christine Chubbuck had been recently nominated for a recognition award by this entity. However, he had to cancel his appearance due to the birth of his son. The second camera, operated by a way more experienced woman, and 30 years her senior, Jean Reed, was pointed at the Newswatch desk that, for the first time on that show, had been placed near the usual interview area. Christine, in the meantime, was already sitting at the desk, ready for the close-up of her head and shoulders to be displayed in all her black and white printed glory across a few hundred Floridian tubes. On Christine's lap, away from the indiscreet camera angles and eyeballs of everyone, rested a bag. A tote bag Jean actually knew pretty well. This bag was the one Christine normally used to carry her handmade puppets, the ones she used to put on shows entertaining many special needs children at the Sarasota Memorial Hospital, a volunteer work she developed as a result of Jean herself, who steered Chris to that task in order to help her with her self-confidence issues. What no one knew was that, although Chris even used the puppets on her own TV program from time to time, on that particular morning, despite still containing 2 puppets inside, the primary purpose of that bag was to carry another type of item, a way less joyful one, a caliber 38 Smith & Wesson. It would be inaccurate to state that no one was aware of this revolver. For example, co-worker Robert Smith, the night editor who wasn't on duty that morning, knew about it. Chubbuck had confided to him about the acquisition of the gun, likely at the Bullet Hole, a local specialty store then located in Sarasota's Main Street. She had also told him that it would be a neat idea if someday she took it out and blew herself away live on air. Robert chose to laugh rather than crying. It had to be just another one of those dark, histrionic and self-deprecating jokes Chris had already made everyone used to, even if just 500 homes tuned in on Christine's show daily. She was still some kind of a small celebrity, and a journalist after all. In other words, a somewhat easy target. She certainly bought the weapon for purposes of self-defense, right? Unfortunately, wrong. Christine Chubbuck had other plans in mind for the gun, way more diabolical plans. But not even the vestigial people who either knew about the existence of the gun had heard her quote-unquote jokes about blowing her brains on air, or were already aware of her S-word tendencies, just like that time 4 years prior, when she took way many pills at once. Not even they could suppose what was about to take place in less than 10 minutes. Perhaps, when they were young, they got too exposed to the classic tale of a boy who cried wolf, that their parents would tell them with the best of intentions, which made them very skeptical even of real-life fairy tales. It was just a regular summer Monday morning for them, with only the addition of a small news segment to open the show. Nothing else. No, let me actually correct something here. There was another deflection from the norm, and this one, yes, this one caught absolutely everyone by surprise. For some then unknown reason, Christine Chubbuck requested and insisted alongside technical director Linford Rickard that today's show should be taped. Nowadays, with all the technological advancements, this wouldn't even be a question. By default, all TV shows are recorded and archived somehow. Every angle, every second, every word. But we are talking about the mid-70s here. We are talking about an era where videotape was still in its infancy. Domestically speaking, we are really talking about the earliest stages of videotaping. The most common and mass-produced formats of home video recording, Betamax and VHS, were even yet to be released. Only the hardcore enthusiasts had then access to the very few and ultra-expensive pieces of equipment existing in the market. And even professionally speaking, both the equipment and videotapes, and even film reel, already in use for decades, were quite expensive, even more for a low-budget local station like WXLT. In summary, only the essential programming was supposed to be recorded and eventually preserved. And quite frankly, that little Suncoast Digest talk show, with its relatively common people and common situations, was far from qualifying as worthy of preservation. But Chris insisted. Here is another director who decided to trust Christine's professionalism, so he obliged. Once again, Chubbuck certainly knew what she was doing. There was certainly a very strong reason for such a request. It would mean half an hour of videotape consumption, but certainly a worthy one. Oh boy, if they only knew. The clock hands formed an upside-down L, which meant it was time to debut the new format on the then 10-month-old Suncoast Digest program. On screen appeared the head and shoulders of Christine Chubbuck, aided by a mix of both machine-typed and handwritten papers. She didn't open the show in the usual manner by greeting the viewers with a smile, but it wasn't that off. Nothing seemed normal so far on that particular broadcast anyway. Christine began reading the daily news right away. She looked nervous. She seemed to be gasping for air. Still nothing that out of the ordinary, considering everyone knew Chris would get nervous every time she had to read from a script live. On that weekend, in the Sarasota area, there was a firing at a parking lot. A man was stabbed in the chest. There was also a second armed robbery attempted within a week. The first one, last week, involved teenager gunmen at a bar, followed by a high-speed auto wheel chase. Yesterday morning, the second attempt happened, with a different setting only. This time, an airport restaurant. At least this time, this setting could supposedly be shown. WXLT covered it in loco, with filmed footage ready to be shown on TV. But there was one problem though. The film reel jammed, and the piece couldn't run at the desired moment. Camerawoman Jean Reed signaled to Christine about the technical difficulty, and Chubbuck, being the pro she was, immediately realized it and did her best to deal with the setback. And there was another setback as well. The news segment was supposed to last just for 5 minutes, but it had been already running for 8. But let's remember, Christine certainly knew what she was doing. And that's when, at 9:38 AM, in the most horrendous way possible, history was made on American television. No, on worldwide television. The film reel had jammed, but Christine Chubbuck hadn't given up yet on the idea of bringing into our small screens true graphic images of blood and guts. And what could be even bloodier and guttier than a failed day-old film report? What about live footage? Destiny prevented the film reel from working properly, but not even Destiny could stop Christine's revolver cylinder from rotating with top efficacy. That's when she uttered her final ever words, the ones she kept reading from her papers, as heard in the prologue of this video. It stated that, in keeping with Channel 40's policy of bringing us the latest in blood and guts and in living color, we were going to see a television first, an attempted S-word. Just forget the in living color part around this channel. Almost before even finishing saying the S-words, Christine Chubbuck quickly took the revolver out of the bag, pointed it behind her right ear, and a loud bang similar to a mini explosion, typical with weapons of that caliber, followed, echoing all over the studio. Her head violently bumped over the newswatch desk before her whole body began sailing toward the floor on its own bloodfall. Director Linford Rickard was flabbergasted with all that, but had just a couple of seconds to quickly react. The most proper response he came up with was just to fade the screen to black and quickly approach Christine to demand for an explanation. What kind of a prank was that supposed to be? What kind of bad taste joke was that? Had Christine Chubbuck finally lost all her marbles? And so was the audience, also demanding for an explanation, calling the station in droves, trying to understand if that was just some stupid stunt or what the hell was going on. But soon Rickard realized there was no prank after all, much less any joke. And if Christine Chubbuck had really lost anything, it wasn't her marbles, but rather her joy, her dignity. She really had just put one of 6 Watt cutter bullets in her possession through her brain in an attempt to also lose her own life. An attempt that then turned out to be unsuccessful, yet she was unresponsive, in critical condition, but her heart was still beating. After promptly contacting 911, the whole team quickly went to work on moving studio paraphernalia out of the way to facilitate the arrival of the South Rail Ambulance Unit crew, who should take Christine to the Sarasota Memorial Hospital, the same hospital where she worked for 4 years as a computer operator during her hiatus in the media industry. Back when computers were gigantic and sometimes occupied entire rooms. The same hospital where she often made children smile with her puppetry shows, and the same hospital that was about to welcome Christine Chubbuck once more, but now to hold her brand new and contrasting horror show. Meanwhile, and speaking of shows, the rest of Suncoast Digest was filled with public service programming. And that's how the awaiting couple lost their literal 15 minutes of fame. I'm going to hell after this petty worry of mine. Almost as fast as the paramedics, the Sarasota County Police also arrived. After all, there was the equivalent of a crime scene to investigate. And, of course, the reporters from other stations and newspapers also popped up quickly, avid for one more of those bloody and gutsy stories like no other. If it bleeds, it leads. Whether it's a Joe Schmo or one of their colleagues. No exceptions. With Christine's body gone, the studio furniture was moved back to the same places it was when the incident happened, so the process of its reconstruction could take place. In the midst of all that chaos, director Rickard made another discovery, which was as curious as it was morbid. The script that Christine wrote was still over the Newswatch desk, and it was now covered in blood. But no guts. Even so, it was still possible to read its content. Besides the machine-typed news that Christine read during the program, it was possible to find additional papers as well, handwritten, where Christine Chubbuck basically wrote the news report about her own incident, which was supposedly to be read during the news programming on both WXLT and also other stations later on. In it, she wrote that she had been transported to the Sarasota Memorial Hospital and was in critical condition. It should never cease to amaze us how accurate this report turned out to be. She could have died right away, but no, the truth is that, at that moment in time, she was indeed in critical condition. As for her use of the term attempted S-word, and because I haven't stressed out enough today, she was a true professional, and therefore knew there was no way she could get that one wrong. An act of that kind is always an attempt. The difference is that it can be either well succeeded or failed. But it can always be classified as an attempt. Regarding the critical condition part, that one was indeed a very correct prediction. A shot in the dark, if you will. No pun intended, believe it or not. One that, for 14 hours, was valid. Whereas in 5725 Lawton Drive, there was a frenzy with collecting photos, evidence, interrogations, tape viewing, notepad filling, and even mass copying of the tape to be sent to other stations, more than interested in reporting about it, which in the meantime would be vetoed by the ABC group, and such copies allegedly destroyed. In 1700 South Tamiami Trail, Christine Chubbuck, who entered the facilities at 9:57 before being quickly surrounded by her closest loved ones, was fighting for what was left of her life in a losing struggle that lasted for 14 hours. At 11:10 p.m. of that same day, Christine Chubbuck would be officially pronounced dead. But not before her mother Peg was exclusively interviewed right then and there at the hospital by one of those many leeches. I mean, reporters who really took seriously that if it bleeds, it leads mantra. Because why not, right? Why not? Christine Chubbuck may have lost the battle for her life, but she surely won the battle of proving her core point with this kind of attitude, which is quite ironic to say the least. the one who claims to know for sure what happens with our brain, or soul, or whatever you wanna call it, the moment our life abandons our body, is undoubtedly lying. And that's exactly that uncertainty that opens the gate for the creation of gazillion theories and beliefs, some more scientific and some more supernatural than others, about what really occurs. One of those theories defends that during the very final instances of our lives, our brain, before shutting down for good, performs some kind of a rewind, and in our last ever flashback, we get to revisit the most memorable and impactful moments of our intimacy. If this theory is correct, CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK had close to 14 hours at her disposal to live this final dream. We will never know if CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK sailed through her life's past on board of her hospital bed. We will never know if, in case she did, she regretted anything, or if on the contrary, she became proud of the mark she could possibly leave. We will never know if she had time to recognize that right here or over there she could have changed this or that in her life trajectory. But one thing we know for sure, whether she did it or not, we are definitely embarking on that trip, perhaps in her place. We, the ones who are still walking around, will try to make an effort to understand why CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK did what she did, perhaps in her place as well. Was it just a matter of protesting against the popular "if it bleeds, it leads" mantra? Well, this one I can tell you right away, that the answer to such a question is a sound no. CHRISTINE only took advantage of the circumstances. That was not, however, what led her to conclude that her life wasn't worth living any longer. But to better understand everything, and considering how we started by the end, it's finally time to go back to the beginning. CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK was born on the 24th of August 1944 in Hudson, Ohio, a small town of about 22,000 people, not that far away from the more known city of Cleveland. CHRISTINE lived in an upper-middle-class neighborhood and was a member of a 5-people household, along with her father George Fairbank Chubbuck, a salesman and businessman, mother Margareta Augusta Davis Chubbuck, more known among friends and acquaintances as simply Peg, older sibling Timothy Fairbank Chubbuck, or simply Tim, and younger sibling Gregory Allen Chubbuck, or simply Greg. Apparently, the Chubbucks liked to engage in notable things every 2 years. Just take a look. Chris's parents married in 1940, had their first child in 1942, their middle child, i.e. CHRISTINE, in 1944, and finally their last child in 1946. As far as being upper middle class, we are talking about the type of upper middle class that owns a summer cottage in Florida with a nice view to the Gulf of Mexico. We are talking about the type of upper middle class that, a few years later, would quite frequently acquire 4-digit designer dresses so that their daughter could look outstanding on live television. You know, that type of upper middle class. Oh, and we are also talking about the type of upper middle class that sends their kids to private schools. Chris attended several private schools throughout her student life, both at university and even before that, during her latest high school years. But one aspect was constant. Wherever CHRISTINE set her rear end to listen to her teachers and professors, whether her parents were paying good money for that seat or not that big of an amount, CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK was always a great student. And she performed even better in every field that had to do with verbal communication. No wonder. CHRISTINE had always been particularly skilled in her language and how to properly use it in such a way that, when there were no words that could be applied to certain concepts, she would solve the problem by coming up with words of her own, as if she was creating her own dialect. CHRISTINE attended Hudson High School, a local public school, for her junior high studies between 1956 and 1959. Besides the normal academic endeavors, young Chris also participated in several extracurricular projects the school provided. Oh, and speaking about this phase of Christine's life, I must say that she, even at just 13, was already considerably taller than most of her peers. I'm not sure about the accurate height, as I found conflicting information regarding that, but depending on who we ask, she was either 5'9" or 5'11", the latter being my own height too. I risk saying that maybe, and just maybe, she was 5'9" at 13, but ended up growing to be 5'11" as an adult, who knows. Back on the topic of her school hobbies, we know that Christine played flute on the marching band and was also a part of the Girls Athletic Association, where she would engage in several different activities such as swimming, dancing and play nights. Christine Chubbuck's engagement with hobbies wasn't limited to the school walls though. Speaking yet about when she was around 13 and already gigantic, Christine was a kayaking ace, even earning a national ranking around 16. Despite being very successful at this sport, Chris would end up quitting, something that would become a constant in her life. Every time she mastered something, she would end up quitting, as she never truly felt fulfilled in life. The same happened during a specific summer when Christine was able to get the lead role in a theater play held at the University of North Carolina. Although she played her part brilliantly, here is another example where Christine never got to engage again in something she seemed to be very talented at. The closest she was to that was with those puppet shows she organized, something she started doing from a young age as well. Besides her kayak and theater accolades, Christine was also receiving awards at school. And I'm not exactly talking about good grades now. Being considered the most mischievous student and also the student with the best sense of humor during 7th grade. While the school she was attending offered classes from 7th to 12th grade, Christine's parents still decided to send her to an all-girls private school for her high school studies. Laurel School for Girls in Shaker Heights, a suburb of Cleveland, where the family moved to in the meantime. This school was founded in 1896 and covered all the academic needs of opulent girls, from preschool to senior high. Christine enrolled in that school in 1959 and would end up graduating in 1962. There, Christine Chubbuck kept pursuing new hobbies, founding, along with a few schoolmates, the Dateless Wonder Knitting Club. She came up with the name, where apparently girls who simply couldn't get a date would rather dedicate themselves to the nerdiest of female activities at the time. Well, someone had to handcraft her own puppets, right? Regarding the name choice, it's worth noting that this type of self-deprecating humor will become one of her lamentable trademarks from a tender age. Anyway, you will understand even better the nuances of this Dateless Wonder Knitting Club later on, I'm sure. Once again, Christine Chubbuck's verbal skills were recognized between the walls of this academic establishment. After finishing high school, it came time for Chrissy to initiate her college life. The first university she attended was Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, a public university where Christine studied for a year and majored in theater arts. Then she joined Endicott College, at the time an all-girls private college. Here we go again. In Beverly, Massachusetts, before switching to Boston University, where she earned a degree in broadcasting in 1965. Oh, and besides the aforementioned summer theater workshop at the University of North Carolina, Christine Chubbuck also attended another summer workshop at New York University in 1967, most specifically a radio and television workshop, but this time she had already entered the workforce. Christine followed with universities the same approach she had with her gazillion hobbies. She simply had to try them all. And if you think Christine Chubbuck's hopping stops here, you better think again. In fact, this is just the onset. And from this point on, I need to be extra careful not to mix all the flash flood of letters and numbers that will pop all over next. while trying to describe all TV stations where Christine, for a longer or shorter period, left her footprint somehow. I will promise I will do my best not to corrupt this entire media alphabet. Trust me. Christine Chubbuck got her degree, and it wasn't long before she turned into a de facto professional in the field. The first TV outlet offering Christine an opportunity was the public station WVIZ, Channel 25 from Cleveland, where she worked for about a year. But don't think that Chubbuck was put in front of a camera right away. Actually, it took quite a while for that to materialize. Christine's job description at this station was public relations and channel promotion. A 4-month absence from the media industry soon followed, when Christine was involved with the non-profit humanitarian organization March of Dimes in Cuyahoga County, Ohio. She returned in March 1967 after moving to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to join another local public station, WKED-TV Channel 13, where she worked for 4 months as well as an assistant producer in 2 shows, Women's World and Key to the City. After spending that summer of 1967 on the NYU workshop, Chris got hired by yet another station, now back in her home state of Ohio, most precisely in the city of Canton, where she would debut on an independent station, WJAN Channel 17, nowadays an affiliate of Bounce TV in the Cleveland area. While there, she did... who knows? She did something. It only lasted a couple of months anyway. Then Christine left that station in October 1967, and that's when she decided to move to the faraway state of Florida in an attempt to start over. And we will analyze a possible hint on why this might have happened a little later on. Christine moved to the family's 1918-built summer cottage in Siesta Key, Sarasota, and made it her official house to live in solitude for some time. This is also when Chris went on the already mentioned long hiatus from working at TV stations. Although she didn't completely go away from the media industry at first, in the couple of years she lived alone, she was working for Storer Cable Television, a local cable TV service provider. Her 4-year career as a computer operator at the Sarasota Memorial Hospital was her next destination. Ironically, this would become by far the workplace where she spent the most time. I mean, something with very little to do with her real field of expertise. It's also worth noting that it was during this hiatus, about 2 years after she moved, that Chris ceased living on her own. In November 1969, her parents got divorced, and Mother Peg decided to go live with her daughter to deal with the sorrow. The house becoming a women's club was short-lived though, as not long thereafter, her younger brother Greg decided to join the party. Sometime in 1973, however, Greg got engaged and left the cottage, being almost immediately replaced by their older brother Tim, who in the meantime had contracted mononucleosis in Boston and therefore decided to move to the house. It's also worth mentioning that Tim worked as an interior decorator, as the good gay man that he was. Sorry, couldn't resist. Don't cancel me. It was Tim who decorated pretty much the entire house, including Chrissy's little princess bedroom, giving it his special touch. The Chubbucks formed some sort of, according to their own words, an adult community. Finally, after that long break, Christine Chubbuck made her glorious and long-awaited return to the intricacies of the television world in that same year of 1973, by going to work at another local independent television station in the neighboring city of St. Petersburg. No, not the Russian one. WTOG Channel 44. Nowadays Tampa Bay 44. She worked there in the traffic department for 4 days. Yeah, not 4 months, not even 4 weeks. It was really just 4 days. After not even having warmed up her seat over there, it was finally in August that Christine got hired for the first time by a network-affiliated station, the station that would at last put her on the map. And which Christine also made famous, albeit in the worst way possible, as we saw. WXLT-TV Channel 40. I'm convinced that during her 4 days at WTOG, she got the call from WXLT and simply decided to jump ship. Oh, and I'm finally done with this soup of letters and numbers. It was already getting ridiculous. My brain has officially fried. WXLT, which I remind you is still active, having just changed its call sign in 1986 to WWSB, began its activities on the 23rd of October 1971, meaning it wasn't even a thing when Christine Chubbuck landed in Sarasota. It was founded by Robert R. Nelson, a World War II veteran. This story is clearly full of them. He was born in New Jersey but raised in Philadelphia, living at that time in Bradenton, a city belonging to Manatee County, a neighbor of Sarasota County. He entered the radio station business in 1958 before deciding to venture himself into the television world too, by founding the first Sarasota-based station, WXLT-TV Channel 40. By the way, and as a fun fact, XL is just the Roman numeral for 40. Got it? The channel broadcast not only local shows, but also the usual nationwide aired ABC programming, and covered especially the counties of Sarasota and Manatee, besides a few other Tampa Bay areas, operating with a very low budget, even for the time, due to its almost experimental nature. This means the equipment was cheap or already outdated. In other words, the crew was minimal. For example, when the channel launched, there were just 13 people on board, mostly young, inexperienced, and often forced to be polyvalent, as we saw with the camera women example. Moreover, but nevertheless expected, they were poorly compensated. For instance, Bob Keane, their first ever news anchor, would sometimes earn just $5 per newscast. Even Christine Chubbuck herself never earned more than $100 a week during her tenure there. Similarly to their polyvalency, all these limitations invited the staff to sometimes work in very unorthodox ways. One of those ways would be handing Polaroid cameras to the street reporters and then sticking the instant photos they took to a board that would appear on the corner of the screen during newscasts. Video editing at its best. As time progressed, the channel's working conditions improved. And also the salaries, I presume. But this only began happening after Christine was already gone. During the early days, while the channel insisted on maintaining its expected levels of unorthodoxy, some within the industry even coined it Funny 40 as a result. But something way less funnier was about to happen with Channel 40. A few months before Christine Chubbuck got hired by WXLT, most precisely on the 28th of February, both this TV station and a few others, and even some radio ones, started being investigated by the Federal Communications Commission under suspicions of unfair hiring. When Christine was hired, she finally had her debut in front of the cameras and not just behind the scenes. In this case by being an entry-level anchor presenting Newswatch on some evenings. But it wasn't long before, to meet FCC regulations, WXLT was forced to give Christine the morning shows she became known for, Suncoast Digest. I'm not suggesting that Christine wasn't talented. I even mentioned several times throughout this video that she was actually very talented, nor undeserving of that spot. But I have to compromise with the truth, and without entering technical territory that probably neither I nor most of you would understand anyway. What we need to be aware of here is that this is the true reason why a morning show was given that quickly to Christine Chubbuck, just mere weeks after she had arrived. Suncoast Digest will debut on the 3rd of September. Earlier on, the program was mainly focused on showing day-to-day situations related to local people, where many of them would get the chance to, during that half hour, promote, for instance, their local business or other of their activities. With the time, and perhaps due to the ambitions of Christine, new approaches began being tried, with more social and environmental issues getting featured. That's how, as we saw, Christine even got nominated for at least one environmental award. It's fair to say that Christine, with her Monday to Friday morning show, was becoming some sort of a proto-social justice warrior of the 70s, minus the part of being just plain crazy like the ones of today. And as we also saw, her directors would give her enough freedom to pretty much run the entire show the way she desired. On the other hand, however, it was also this SJW vein of hers that quickly made the tensions grow between her and her superiors. The issue wasn't necessarily related to the Suncoast Digest show itself, but rather everything beyond. This program was far from being Christine's only duty at the station. As we saw, everyone did everything. Besides preparing and running the morning show and anchoring some newscasts on the weekends, Chris was asked to also do research and write a few stories. Sometimes she would be expected to write 4 or 5 pieces a day. Tensions began increasing most precisely when the station, which at best was able to get ratings around the 10,000 TV sets tuned in, not that much even for the standards of the region, began sensationalizing the news, looking for stories that were particularly more violent, bloodier and more controversial, in an attempt to glue more eyeballs to the channel, always going after the proven formula of if it bleeds, it leads. This means that sometimes the themes and stories chosen by Christine to air on Newswatch would be relegated to second, third or even fourth plan, if they would even air at all, in favor of those more morbid and juicier pieces. This attitude would cause constant tantrums between her and especially news director Mike Simmons, when not with the station's boss himself, Bob Nelson, whom Christine accused of not truly worrying about the quality of his child and trying to only hire people based on how little he could pay them, instead of due to their talent as professionals. It's worthy of notice, however, that her clashes with the owner were way less frequent, as her criticisms of him were normally done during private conversations with other members of the staff, and therefore on the back of the one who signed the paychecks. Women being women. Don't cancel me again, okay? Speaking yet of the former, the one who had the constant face-to-face clashes with her, which sometimes would get pretty loud and ugly right in the middle of the studio in front of everyone. There is a famous account of a violent tantrum she had with Mr. Simmons just 3 days before she departed from this world, when she realized one of her stories had been left out in favor of a shootout. These tantrums were becoming more and more persistent as CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK was becoming more and more frustrated with the direction the channel was taking. Just a week before that big fight with Mike Simmons, Chris presented us with another one of her tantrums, this time with, I presume, her show's director, Gordon Galbraith, all because of a freaking bouquet of plastic flowers. Everything happened during a morning when a state politician was her guest, and the bouquet was placed on the interview table as decoration. When her eyes met the flowers, she just freaked out and violently flung the bouquet across the studio, while yelling that she wouldn't have those damned things on her studio, leaving everyone around her, including her guest, pretty uncomfortable. The big question here, in my humble opinion, is that the beef wasn't necessarily because of a simple bouquet of fake flowers. That's very reductive. It wasn't the object per se that constituted the problem, but rather what it represented, the message implied. An attempt to get the attention in an unnatural way, via artificiality, and also the attempt to please the ruling classes via this forced and artificial quote-unquote beauty. According to Christine Chubbuck's perspective, this is what WXLT was turning into, that is, a channel that was artificial, hypocritical and inorganic, where the ends justified all the means, and the will to always be on the good side of those who were truly in charge always spoke louder no matter what. Or maybe I'm wrong and she simply found those flowers corny, who knows? In case I'm correct, and if this attitude of protest was indeed even reasonable if we think about it, there were, however, other occasions where Christine was way off, regardless of how we look at them, especially during her later days. Not only Christine was always on the defensive, turning herself into someone even more socially awkward than she already was, but sometimes even reached paranoid levels. For example, there were 2 episodes involving the aforementioned camera women, Shay and Jean, where they were invited to leave the rear of their cameras and conduct an interview each in front of them instead. Chubbuck went ballistic on both occasions. The focus should be on her and her alone, and the camera ladies should limit themselves to their backstage affairs. But even worse was that time someone suggested that Miss Manatee County and Miss Florida 1973 Ellen Mead should present the weather, which made delusional Christine begin believing that the younger and more attractive beauty pageant winner was going to steal her spot and somehow replace her. These displays of very hard to deal with person in a working environment were always escalating, while in parallel, her life outside of the studios was crumbling, whether her peers realized it or not. Sometimes they seemed aware, as Christine was even very open and even repetitive about her personal struggles. Other times, they seemed to be completely oblivious or simply uninterested. But in the end, which personal struggles that seem to afflict Christine so much, to the point where there is little doubt they were the big instigator behind Christine's final decision, are we exactly talking about? Without further ado, we now realize that, despite living an apparent life that many could only dream of, nothing could stop Chris from feeling an unexplained void in her existence. A void that, nowadays, is referred to by the more technical term of chronic depression. Christine Chubbuck was raised in an upper-middle-class neighborhood, amidst a financially comfortable family, a family she had a good relationship with, both with her parents and also her brothers. All of them, to a major or minor degree, were her best friends and confidants. But that was still not enough. Christine Chubbuck studied in the best schools in Ohio, and then in several reputable universities, where her intelligence and sense of humor were even highly regarded, and rightfully so. But that was still not enough. Christine Chubbuck mastered a countless number of extracurricular efforts, from arts to crafts to sports, getting praise and even awards, but that was still not enough. Already as an adult, and after moving to Siesta Key, Christine Chubbuck lived in a place many would consider a true paradise on earth. She was part of the typical coastal Florida beach community, even trying to spend every moment of her spare time living the corresponding lifestyle. She constantly tanned her already sun-darkened skin. She used flip-flops as her normative footwear, and she would engage in the normal beach activities such as swimming, scuba diving, sailing, fishing, and even participated in sand sculpture competitions, like the one where she teamed with her brother Tim and placed 4th, just about 2 months and a half before ending up placing 1st in terms of that infamous act we now know so well. Because, as we also know now, that was still not enough. Professionally, Christine Chubbuck was highly validated and recognized for her talent, confidence, elegance, the way she carried herself, her caring for noble causes, and relative success, even more so if we take into account how it was even harder those days for women to thrive in an environment way more associated with the male gender. Christine Chubbuck was even a celebrity, not on a large scale, but there was always that time or two when she would be recognized on the street. But that was still not enough. Even with all the validation she received, all the praise she got, all the sun rays she was bathing in, all the walks along the beach she did, all her traveling across the country, from state to state, school to school, job to job, experience to experience, nothing was enough. The void was always there. And it's not that her family wasn't aware of such a void. Christine's parents spent literally about $1 million with mental health care professionals in a span of 20 years. It has been reported that, not long before departing, Christine was seeing a local psychologist named Rona Ross, who apparently, and whether you believe it or not, is still active to this day. But once again, even that was still not enough to avoid the tragedy. It wasn't just to the therapist that Chris confided what was tormenting her soul though. Her mother also provided her with a shoulder to cry on, maybe even to greater length. Her mother knew about her struggles. Christine would fully open herself to her. Her mother was the type of person who would know when it was the right time to keep a secret. That's why Peg neglected to inform the station where Chrissy worked about the latter's depressive and even S-word tendencies. She was afraid her daughter would get fired if they discovered it. Even her brothers, when still very young, knew something very wrong was happening concerning the way their sis dealt with emotions. When Tim, Chris and Greg were, respectively, 12, 10 and 8 years of age, the oldest sibling told the youngest that they would have to hug Chrissy extra hard, as they weren't going to have her very long. And Tim was right. Just a couple of decades later, Chrissy was indeed gone. It's not that her brothers, while growing up, weren't getting more and more aware of that. Chris would frequently talk with them about it, especially with Greg. Just a couple of days before her ultimate act, literally just a couple of days in fact, Christine once more confided in Greg about thinking of doing it. When he asked her if she wanted to talk further about that feeling of hers, Christine refused to follow with that conversation, supposedly postponing it to the following day. A conversation that wouldn't happen ever again. Christine exhibited a very bipolar nature, and I'm not talking from the standpoint of the disorder, despite not ruling out that hypothesis at all, even if I'm aware that she was never officially diagnosed with such a malady. I even think it's very likely that she indeed suffered from bipolar disorder, and even her brother Greg seems to share the same opinion. Nevertheless, what I'm really trying to say here is that in Christine's life, everything worked as opposing poles, never in spectrums. Everything was either black or white. The chance of grey also existing wasn't even considered. Everything was hot or cold, never warm or just cool. Everything was good or evil, wonderful or terrible, joyful or scary. But is the cause of all that void really 100% mysterious? Speaking of 100%, perhaps what I'm about to say next will also sound like 100% speculation, but I think it might be a detail that may have very well played a considerable role in the formation of Chris's chronic depression. A detail I never witnessed anyone talking about. Well, one thing I know for sure. It certainly didn't contribute in any way, shape or form to Christine's well-being. Not many people know that, less than 3 weeks shy of delivering Christine, Mother Peg lost her brother William in a battle in France during World War II. He was just 25. Where I'm trying to go with this is that the last 3 weeks of her pregnancy were under maximum levels of stress, considering how the loss of her brother, even more if we consider how really young he still was, might have been truly devastating. Perhaps we can go even further and consider that the entire pregnancy was truly stressful, even when her brother was still alive, as he had enlisted in the army the previous year and she never knew if he was going to stay alive for much longer due to the ongoing war. Is there any correlation? Isn't there? I don't know, and neither do you. But if there is indeed a correlation, it's odd to think that, even in the case of Christine Chubbuck's incident, Mustache Man has found a way to be involved somehow. But I have another question. Even if what I'm about to say next sounds like a paradox, does the unexplained, innate and chronic depression of Christine explain all her somewhat erratic behavior in search of her inner peace? The answer is no. Always keeping in mind that I don't have a degree in any mental health field, it's not up to me to analyze and find a definitive answer in that old existing debate between different schools of mental health academics about chronic depression being the responsible for the chaos in someone's life, or rather the other way around, that is, the catastrophic events in someone's life being the true cause of the depression. Or even if both conditions feed each other mutually, which is personally the theory that I subscribe to the most. Speaking of subscribe, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. It helps a lot. But one thing I'm totally sure about, with or without chronic depression, there was one particular aspect in CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK's life that bothered her like nothing else. An aspect she fought against her whole short adult life, ending up facing a sound defeat. An aspect that not only she didn't hide from anyone but was even pretty open about it, for the few willing to listen. I'm talking about the second aspect of CHRISTINE's life she is most known for, right after the fabled act of ending her own life live on TV. Her romantic life. Or better yet, lack thereof. Just like I did with the generality of this video, in this specific chapter I'm also starting at the end. CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK died a virgin, at 29. And it's public knowledge that it bothered her like nothing else in life. Not even the thirst for blood and guts by the press bothered her so much. It could be said that it almost bothered her close to Elliot Rodger levels. The ones aware of him will get the reference, I'm sure. It might seem at first that it didn't bother her that much, considering how she would even make plenty of jokes about this status of hers among peers and family. For example, one afternoon, the WXLT crew was playing a mock newscast just for the lols, and CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK, with her characteristic self-deprecating sense of humor and making an allusion to her virginal condition, introduced herself to the ghost audience by the name of PRISTINE BUTTOCKS. Very creative joke, I must say. But this was just CHRISTINE being CHRISTINE. Just because she had the capacity to laugh at herself didn't mean she wasn't hurt inside. As a further matter, who knows if these self-deprecating jokes didn't act as some sort of self-harm, very common in people with depression. Some people use razors as weapons for that purpose. But Chris would rather use the weapon she could handle the best, her words. And trust my words too when I say this, soul wounds take way longer to heal than skin ones. We need, however, to take into consideration a possible pair of misconceptions regarding CHRISTINE's virginity that we need to clarify. The first one is that it wasn't exactly the virginity itself that bothered her. CHRISTINE was a female living her last years in a very open-minded beach community, if you know what I mean. It's true that CHRISTINE wasn't conventionally beautiful, although very showy, but she wasn't disgustingly ugly nor suffered from some physical anomaly either. Therefore, it wouldn't be that great of a challenge for her to find someone willing to solve that supposed problem of hers, if you also know what I mean. But the real problem was that her virginity was just a symptom of what truly bothered her. Even if CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK, professionally, tended to follow the feminist guidelines of the strong and independent woman thriving in a world supposedly dominated by patriarchy and masculinity, in her personal life, she seemed more interested in leaning more toward the role of the traditional housewife. When she was just 15, we could already read in her autobiography, "I hope to be able to become a lady with a little spice, a housewife, mother and good friend to all of my acquaintances. But whatever I endeavor, I shall try to make a go of it, because if there is anything that leaves a sour taste in my mouth, it's failure." CHRISTINE's real issue was having trouble establishing social connections in general, more so if the goal was to find a romantic partner. CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK didn't want to offer her purity to some random dude. CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK wanted to offer it to her discovered soulmate, and never coming across her true soulmate, even after endless years searching for him, left a sour taste in her mouth indeed. But this is also where the second misconception enters. Many wrongly believe that, besides being a virgin, CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK never truly met the feeling of love throughout her whole life. Using terms more related to her times, many thought CHRISTINE was a pure, kissless virgin spinster. Using more modern terms, and in a world where being single at 29 is no big deal anymore compared to the 1970s, CHRISTINE would be classified as a female incel, or femcel for short. But I said that she had trouble establishing romantic connections. Not that she never had one. Despite spending her whole life without going under the bed sheets with anyone, Christine was at least involved in 2 known romantic relationships. This seems to strengthen a certain point defended by certain radical online communities out there, but I digress. There simply was no opportunity for Christine to go under the bed sheets. In the first case because she was still very young, and in the second case because, well, you must hear to believe. Let me tell you right away that regarding her first relationship, there are 2 conflicting accounts. A more vague one coming from her family, let's call it version F, and a more detailed one coming from some of her Hudson High ex-schoolmates. Let's call it version S. Personally, I have little doubts about which one seems to be by far the most accurate, but you may have a different opinion, so I'm still bringing you both. According to version F, when Christine was 16 and still into kayaking, she met another practitioner, then 23 and apparently called David. When her family learned about the existence of this individual, they were quick to nickname him Dave the Kayaker. Chris and Dave dated for a brief period of time, until he had the terrible misfortune of dying in a car crash, while the passenger riding with him got paralyzed. Chrissy, moved by her very benevolent heart, and in an attempt to minimize the tragedy after the loss of her boyfriend, offered herself to give support to the paralyzed survivor with his physiotherapy in any way she could help. On the opposite corner, we have version S, claiming that Christine met her first boyfriend when she was even younger. His name wasn't Dave, nor was he even a kayaker. His name was Robert Harold Bittel. He was a student at Hudson High, and on the 29th of December 1957, when he was just 17, studied in 12th grade and was even part of the football team, whereas Christine was 13 and attending 8th grade at that same school. He died in a car crash while riding with his fellow John Jerome, who, despite surviving, needed to have both legs amputated. Similarly to version F, this version also states that Christine offered to help him with his physiotherapy. Well, in this last version, we have names, details, and even photos. And everything matches. Therefore, I think it's not hard to realize which one is the more correct. Don't you agree? What I think might have happened with version F, made public by her brother Greg, is that he may have just mixed up a few facts. I don't even rule out the hypothesis that Christine indeed met some Dave in kayaking, he became some crush of hers the family got to know about, or perhaps they even dated for a while, which increases the number of Christine's known relationships from 2 to 3 if that's the case. But Greg just confused things up and mixed his friend slash crush slash boyfriend slash wherever he was to Christine, with the true victim of the car accident years before. After all, we are talking about facts that occurred more than a half a century ago, and our memory is everything but infallible, right? Whatever the case might have been in terms of Christine being either just 13 or 16 during the time she was in her then last relationship, the truth of the matter is that a long time would elapse before Chris got lucky in love again. Or so it seemed. Info about Christine's next relationship is very scarce. We know that very likely sometime during 1967, Christine met someone who was also involved in TV broadcasting. Their passion was so intense that it's said she even moved to Pittsburgh to be closer to this man, who was already in his 30s, whereas Chris was still in her early 20s. Based on the available accounts, it's not clear if Christine met this man before moving to Pittsburgh and getting her job at WKED, or if she met him while already there and wanted not to move to Pittsburgh, as she was already there, but just settle in the area. However, as usual, there was another problem. Nope, no one had died this time, but unfortunately, her father didn't approve of the relationship. Why, you ask? Firstly, because he was considerably older, and secondly, with this being the main reason, because he was Jewish. For someone who was a second lieutenant for the US Army during World War II, Mr. Chubbuck seemed a little confused about which team was supposed to play the anti-Semitic role over there. A heartbroken Christine took the chance to detach her thoughts from this situation at that sad NIC summer workshop before finally moving to Sarasota for good in an attempt at a new life from scratch. Meet new people, see new faces, learn new life approaches, and hopefully find a new heart beating for her. A new heart that, as we know, will never come again. What would come instead was yet another unwelcome misfortune. In the summer of 1973, around the time she began working at WXLT or not long before, something malignant was discovered in Christine's left ovary, which forcibly led to its surgical removal. To make matters worse, she was told that if she failed to conceive within 2 or 3 years maximum, she would be very unlikely to be able to after that. Needless to say, this added extra layers of pressure to an already fragilized CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK. If the possible candidate to future husband and father of her kids was already vestigial at best, now, to add insult to injury, an expiration date had been stamped on her uterus, and the clock was tick-tacking fast. According to her own mother's account, during the years she lived in Sarasota, the dates Christine was able to get were very few and far between, not to mention that nothing substantial would come out of them. Christine would go a long time without anyone even inviting her to have a hot dog at the nearby stand, let alone some good old fancy dinner. Meanwhile, Chris really developed a crush on somebody. This time, a real documented crush. And this time, a crush the same age as Christine. George Peter Ryan, a New Jersey state native but long-time Sarasota resident, worked at WXLT as a financial reporter due to his professional experience as a stockbroker. The fact that he was involved with amateur theater since 1972 would help him display his total comfort in front of the TV cameras. For starters, he was considered very good looking, to the point he was nicknamed Gorgeous George by some co-workers, after famous pro wrestler and TV personality Gorgeous George Wagner, who, despite not being the first celebrity using the moniker, was the one who truly popularized it. Gorgeous George Ryan was handsome, charming, confident, and, perhaps the most crucial factor, recently divorced. Oh, and not only he shared the same first name with Christine's father, but also had a then toddler daughter named Christine, with his now ex-wife Caroline. And I'm really sorry to burst the fantasy bubble of some of you by putting an end to the rumor that George named her daughter after CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK. But the matter of fact is that Ryan met Chubbuck in 1973, whereas his daughter was born in 1971. Another thing George also shared with someone was his S-word tendencies. However, unlike Christine, who was never able to successfully overcome such tendencies, even after all the different approaches tried on her, George seemed to be doing way better. If just 2 years prior he was displaying such tendencies, with his discovery of a type of psychoanalytic therapy known as transactional analysis, nowadays considered somewhat outdated but very en vogue at the time, those tendencies seemed to become a thing of the past. And therapy also brought him additional benefits. Ryan began looking at the surrounding people in a different light, including CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK. George was the typical incorrigible womanizer. And I'm not claiming that feature changed with therapy. I really doubt it. What I'm trying to say is that, as a ladies' man, George appreciated conventionally beautiful women, and most of all, feminine. This means women who were sweet, gentle, and even vulnerable and submissive to a point. The truth is that Christine, at least in her professional environment, her side Ryan was mostly exposed to by far, was everything but. He found her to be a little rude in the way she treated people, excessively self-reliant, and even oozing a certain masculine energy, which would obviously be quite repulsive for people like George. All good, because initially the feeling was mutual. Christine also thought George was just a dick. Nevertheless, while George was exploring the delights of his dear transactional analysis, not only did he begin getting rid of his personal demons and treating people differently, for the better, but also began looking at Christine in a different light. He started realizing that at least a great chunk of that pseudo-masculine energy emanating from Chris was nothing more than a shield she used to cover up her own deep insecurities in a deeply competitive landscape. Therefore, Christine Chubbuck was way more of a sweetheart than she appeared to be. Just like with 99.999% of fictional love tales, this Tom and Jerry couple slowly began to get closer. Or at least, George Peter Ryan was starting to visualize Christine Chubbuck as a good friend, something that wasn't the case at all in the beginning. But what do I exactly mean by good friend? What was missing for the next step? Well, nothing was missing. Quite the contrary, in fact. Something was in excess. As usual, there was another little problem. The problem was that Chris was far from being the only person interested in George. I'm sure you are seeing where this is going. There was a third person in the equation, and the person that was even quite close to Christine. Andrea Kirby was an Alabama native who worked at WXLT as a sports reporter. This was her first of many future experiences in the field. She was about 3 years older than Chris and George, and just like the latter, she was already divorced as well. If, in Gene Reed, Chris had found some sort of a mother figure within Channel 40 studios, we can say that Andrea became a sister figure. Despite her social awkwardness, it was with Andrea with whom Christine would often go out for dinner. It was with Andrea with whom Chris would confide what was tormenting her spirit. It was to Andrea that Chris admitted her love interest for gorgeous George. It was to Andrea that Chris, good-humored at the time, revealed her master plan to conquer him. She would bake him a cake for his 30th birthday on the 26th of June. And I say good-humored at the time because just 3 days prior to that date, she had thrown a really fancy party she had baptized as an after-30 party at her place for the members of the Sarasota Manatee Press Club, where she worked as its secretary. So we could be sure she would certainly get fancy with the cake too. There was just a little detail then unbeknown to Christine, one that she would end up finding out. Andrea Kirby was already seeing George Peter Ryan, and that broke her heart even more. Christine was sent back to ground zero, and the clock still ticking. It seemed that, in the end, George seemed to display some interest in her, but she just confused things a little. Chris had apparently been put in WG's friend zone, and that was all. But Andrea's quote-unquote betrayals wouldn't cease there. A bigger and better TV station had called Andrea, and she had already packed her luggage on her way to Baltimore to also become their sports reporter. Better yet for her, she would be working alongside a young and yet to become a billionaire Oprah Winfrey. Andrea's last day on Channel 40 before moving to Baltimore's Channel 13 was on the 11th of July, just 4 days before Christine decided to take the drastic measure we all know about. It seems that, for Christine, 13 was indeed her bad luck number. In conclusion, the classic trope from the fiction of the treacherous supposed best friend who always wins in the end seems to also be factual in real life. Now, jokes aside, I don't really blame Andrea Kirby for this alleged quote-unquote double betrayal. It wasn't her fault that George Peter Ryan felt more attracted to her than to Christine. Curiously, Andrea wasn't also the most feminine woman in the world. She covered sports, for God's sake, but she still had a better way with men compared to Christine, the true socially awkward of the bunch. And it wasn't also Andrea's fault that the Baltimore station noticed her and found her more fitting for what they were looking for, thus hiring her instead of Christine. As we know or should, sometimes you just need to be in the right place at the right time, and at the time Andrea was. But yeah, one thing is to analyze the whole situation from the outside via 2024 me. Another thing is to analyze the same situation using the head of the protagonist herself, 1974 CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK. I'm sure she felt betrayed by her friends and by George and by everyone. According to quite a few co-workers, CHRISTINE was extremely self-centered, self-pity, and thought only her problems were real problems. So it's not hard to understand that in CHRISTINE's delusional mind, the whole world had turned against her. Meanwhile, the biological clock approaching its deadline spoke louder inside CHRISTINE's instinct, and she quickly forgave George and tried her luck again. And such happened on the 11th of July, the same day Andrea Kirby left WXLT. Andrea was now definitely out of the picture, therefore CHRISTINE was in a better position once again to finally get together with her beloved, gorgeous George. On that particular day, CHRISTINE became more flirty than usual with George, to the point of sitting on his lap and even making some jokes about how horny he should be feeling then. The truth is that, this time, the strategy seemed to be working. This new CHRISTINE was way more pleasant in the eyes of George, to the point where he developed the intention of asking her out for dinner, during another one of her parties the following day. Contrary to the previous one, this scheduled party didn't appear to serve the purpose of celebrating anything in particular. This party sounded more mysterious, as if CHRISTINE had just fallen into the mood of throwing another party once more at her house, just because. Or so they thought. Another apparent mystery was that, after all that flirtatious behavior of hers the previous day, CHRISTINE ended up rejecting George's invitation during said party. Mystery or not, for her family, this rejection was a relief, especially for brother Greg, who had already promised to himself that, if things escalated, he would have to step in and stop her sister's madness of being involved with a playboy. And here we have, once again, the male side of the Chubbucks believing they had the right to just veto every man that Chrissy, an adult and independent woman, chose to date. I'm starting to notice a pattern here. But the family won't need to worry about the man CHRISTINE invited into her life for much longer. Had they known what was about to happen in just 3 more days, they would certainly conclude they had more important things to worry about Chrissy than if her boyfriends were Jews or playboys. After deep introspection about her fragile place in life at that moment, CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK had unfortunately concluded that she was running out of reasons to remain in this world. It's true that she had a dream job, the one she aspired for from a younger age. However, the constant disappointment with the policies of misery over quality brought by the "if it bleeds, it leads" motto was becoming more and more unbearable. The same can be said about the feeling Chris had towards some of her co-workers, namely her friend Andrea Kirby, who were being called to embrace greater experiences while she was being left behind with that little morning show of hers on that little TV channel. It's also true that CHRISTINE, who had displayed a heart the size of the earth, had shown true care towards many human beings, something that would bring true happiness and fulfillment into the lives of many. We shall never forget that she had the worry of sparing her grandparents and the younger brother, who was working that morning, from witnessing her live TV demise. Before that, throughout her life, she helped an amputee with his possible recovery. She helped many pregnant women through her work with the March of Dimes. She brought smiles for special needs kids with her puppet shows at the Sarasota Memorial Hospital. However, when she became the one in need, it seemed that effective help was never available, and that was becoming more and more unbearable. As the old saying goes, the bigger the jump, the harder the fall. We can adapt it to this specific context and declare that the bigger the heart, the harder it breaks. That's how CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK, with her out-of-the-ordinary emotional sense, would also get her soul hurt more easily. Her big heart was looking for its half, but there was no way she was being able to find it, and it also materialized in her big ovary, now alone and naturally hypertrophied to compensate for the lack of its former partner, that was also looking for its half but under a very short deadline. And this absence of elements that would allow her to build a future family, perhaps the size or even larger than the one she grew up in, and therefore make one of her biggest dreams come true was the most unbearable of all. Speaking of family, I'd like to add an extra detail to this story. One very seldom covered, if at all. To me personally, it seems too much of a coincidence that the first time Christine tried the S word happened just mere month after her parents got divorced. And it seems even more of a coincidence that a few years later her father found love again and remarried, and then just a month later we would reach the fatal day where Christine finally finished her act. In case you are curious to know, this second marriage of Mr. Chubbuck lasted exactly 1 year minus 1 day. What I'm trying to demonstrate is that it seems Chris had never overcome her parents' separation, which led her to her first failed attempt. Then, she couldn't accept the fact that her father replaced her mother with a new woman he invited into his life, which ended up helping to drive her to try her second attempt, this time successfully. All this assortment of events in Christine's last month alive simply became too insufferable for her. She simply thought that there was no way out. Or better yet, there was only one way out, although it was the most undesirable one. Anyway, this was exactly the way out that Christine ended up opting for. However, for everything to work out, she needed a proper plan. By using her intelligence and sense of investigation, and despite leading to the conclusion we never wished to find in any story, it's impossible to deny that a great plan she indeed came up with. Firstly, she had to find out the best way to do it. For that, Chubbuck asked Simmons, the news director, if she could write a piece about the S word. Was this an indicator that Christine finally realized that controversy creates cash? We don't know if this was the question that went through the mind of Mike Simmons himself, but one thing we know for sure: he greenlighted the supposed report. Now, armed with the excuse as a visiting card, Christine visited Sarasota's police department, where she was, so to speak, professionally informed about the best way to do it. I won't be particularly graphic with the explanation, as the algorithms living among us aren't particularly big fans of detailed explanations on this topic. All you need to know is that Christine learned the most effective method to advance with her final plan, the one she ended up using. It was also reported that Christine armed herself with yet another excuse, this time a report about firearms. Well, it seems that Christine had finally surrendered herself to the cash cow of blood and guts television. Not about a week before the ultimate day, Chubbuck reportedly went to the aforementioned firearms store, and it said she was accompanied by a police officer who, while she was acquiring her passport to the other world, explained to her everything she needed to know about it. After all, it was important for the TV viewers to get the most informative firearm report conceivable. They deserved it, right? Christine Chubbuck was now in possession of the complete recipe: the revolver, the bullets that disintegrate on contact, and all the know-how to use it to fulfill her final plan. In that final week, Christine was noticeably more good-natured than usual. Except for that ugly dispute with Simmons on her last ever Friday on this hearth, and the S-word reference to her brother on her last ever Saturday. Other than that, Chubbuck was treating Kirby nicer, even if consumed by envy within. She was flirtatious with Ryan, who, by the way, only learned that Christine was a virgin after she had already passed away, even though she knew that it would all be fruitless. So, what the hell? Let me be super sassy for just a day. What do I have to lose at this point? She was recognizing that, in just a few more days, all her problems were going away, as if by magic. Perhaps for the first time ever, Christine felt at peace, and it was a reason to celebrate, hence the mysterious party on Friday night, the one attended by a large portion of the WXLT crew of the time. Among them was, for example, sports reporter Craig Sager, who would become famous later on, especially thanks to his NBA coverage on Turner Sports for years. But she was the only one who truly knew that it was her going away party. Sometime later, already after the tragedy, some writings of her mentioning this party were found, where it was really patent that it was indeed a party with the intent of celebrating her departure. All through that weekend, Christine engaged in those simple activities that brought her so much joy. She baked a cake and worked on her tan. On Sunday, while her younger brother Greg's family stopped by for a visit, she put on a puppet show for his young daughter, which wasn't that unusual. However, another one of her attitudes was she offered a piece of her jewelry to Greg's fiancée. Now, for us, it seems normal. Why keep such a valuable object if she wasn't going to need it in the faraway place to where she was traveling the very next day? And on the next day we arrive, the 196th of the year, a day marked by a military coup d'état in Cyprus that caused 1,647 victims. A day when a Japan Airlines plane was hijacked by a male terrorist armed with a knife. There were no victims this time, but the most famous victim of this day would be witnessed on land instead, in a TV studio instead, where a non-terrorist female armed with a revolver instead would enter the infamous annals of history. But this is the part of the story you have already learned. An autopsy was performed the following day. Christine's cause of death was a surprise to absolutely no one. There was, nevertheless, a curious detail only discovered thanks to such a procedure. In spite of her young age, she was already showing signs of mild atherosclerosis. Not only was her spiritual heart broken, but her physical one seemed to be slowly giving up already as well. Whereas doctors were performing their job of exploring the innards of Christine Chubbuck, a vast external world was experiencing its first contact with her. Over the next handful of days, her historical incident became the talk of the town. It was featured on several TV newscasts and a ton of newspapers. This had apparently become a matter of pride for WXLT's owner Bob Nelson, who was even caught stating, with some level of disgusting satisfaction displayed on his face, that as a result of this incident, Channel 40 made the front pages everywhere. After this initial frenzy, however, and as expected by any student of human behavior, everyone went back to their business as usual, looking for new stories, new shots, new bloods, new guts. Regardless, a few more in-depth articles about the life of Christine Chubbuck were released in the following months, or even years, after the tragedy. The most notable one, written by famous journalist Sally Quinn and originally published in the Washington Post, followed by several reprints in other publications along the way. Even if the whole world had seemingly discovered Christine Chubbuck and the ill-starred legacy she was leaving behind, thereby not letting her soul rest in peace once and for all, to some degree, her family, colleagues and close friends still made an effort to invert this tendency and offer her the eternal peace she rightly deserved. Christine Chubbuck's body was cremated and her funeral was held on a sunny 18th of July at the only site where it could take place, the only site where Christine's soul, when still physically alive, felt exactly like that, still alive and in total amity with herself. It was right there at the Siesta Beach where the memorial service conducted by Reverend Tom Bison occurred, gathering about 120 people for Christine's farewell, not counting the many anonymous passers-by in their beach shorts, swimsuits and bikinis, who decided to take a closer look at that peculiar event. Beach weddings happens all the time, but funerals? During the ceremony, besides Vivaldi's Autumn, 3 songs by Roberta Flack echoed throughout the speakers, as she was one of Christine's favorite music artists. After the usual speeches, preaching all possible and imaginary positive qualities of Chris, her ashes were scattered into the Gulf of Mexico, where they swam as Christine used to do so often over there. However, this time, they finally swam in total freedom wherever they decided to, free from any pressure, any bridles, any deadlines, judgments, second-guessings, and tears. With this final goodbye gesture, did Christine Chubbuck's family and friends accomplish the mission of letting her soul truly rest in peace for all eternity? No. The calm waters of that salty sea would soon get agitated by something that would be invented in the meantime and was just a mirage during Christine's brief lifetime. That thing we call World Wide Web. Due to the long duration of this video, and if you have stuck for this long, let me thank you very much and ask you to leave a like if you haven't yet. You may have forgotten by now that, at the request of Christine herself, the Suncoast Digest talk show was being exceptionally taped on that Monday the self-caused tragedy took place. Speaking of Suncoast Digest, and contrary to the fate of the then host being very soon and quickly cancelled, the program remained on the air for the upcoming years, but not immediately thereafter. While management was deciding exactly what to do from that point onwards, the show was replaced by a rerun of the late 60s TV series Gentleman, a series mainly targeting children and young teens that showed the adventures of a young boy and his fellow bear. It was thereafter decided that WXLT's 9:30 morning show would be renamed Gulf Coast AM, and it returned to the airwaves on the 19th of August. The new host, who substituted Christine, not counting the bear in the meantime, was a young broadcaster from Baltimore. Her name was Elizabeth Oswald, who would later become more known as Beth Hammer. She was then working regularly for a radio station in Bradenton, Florida, when she got the call from WXLT for a weather person audition, but found herself at the wheel of this returning talk show instead. So, after all, Christine was somewhat right when she predicted the weather girl would replace her. As a curious note, the new WXLT's weather presenter will become none other than Shay Taylor, former Suncoast Digest camerawoman who was mentioned previously. Back to Gulf Coast AM, the show would start airing half an hour sooner, not long thereafter. Before that new 9 AM time slot ended up being bought by the televangelist couple Jim and Tammy Becker for their religious show, the PTL Club, around 1976. As a result, Gulf Coast AM was relegated to the brutal time slot of 6:30. If during Christine's days, the show was only able to get around 500 homes tuned in at 9:30, can you imagine the abysmal ratings the show must have been getting at 6:30? After Oswald, Gulf Coast AM had at least one more host before being finally cancelled at an undetermined time. No wonder. Beth Hammer would then switch careers, becoming involved with the music industry later, both as a company owner and also as a bass guitar player in Blue Star Band, a local band from Sarasota where I believe she still plays to this day. But enough with the small talk and back to what you truly wanna know. Let's go back to the tape, shall we? To begin things off, I need to make it really clear that the main purpose of this video is to tell the story of Christine Chubbuck without going into further detail from a technical and even moral standpoint about this videotape and the unceasing hunt for it. There are already countless videos, forum threads and blog and website entries dedicated to that effort. However, we always need to take into account that it still constitutes a fundamental piece in the puzzle of Christine's life. Therefore, I must cover it regardless, even if I limit myself to the bare essentials. Maybe, and just maybe, if you visit the community tab of this channel, you may find some entry where I go into further detail about my opinion on the morality of looking for and wishing to view it. But for now, let's analyze the history of this infamous tape. When we think of the word videotape, we can easily close our eyes and envision some format we are very familiar with, just like for most of us, the common VHS one. And I think this only applies to adults nowadays, as I really doubt children and even teenagers have ever heard about videotapes. Anyway, we aren't talking about a normal videotape format here. During Christine's days, the standard videotape format for TV studios was the 2-inch quadruplex tape, introduced in 1956 and lasting until the late 70s or even early 80s on a large scale. We are talking about a tape reel way larger and heavier than the regular petite and light VHS one for comparison, and the former was the one used to record that tragic Suncoast Digest episode. When Chris was still in the hospital fighting for her life, two relevant events related to this videotape took place. At Channel 40 studios, the tape was replayed for some law enforcement elements who were present there trying to collect as much evidence of the incident as possible, both inside the studios and also in Christine's car. After it was viewed and all reports properly written, the reel was seized by the police as evidence. At the same time, in the hospital, when they quickly learned about the existence of this tape, Christine's family, especially through Greg's intervention, contacted lawyers in order to take out an injunction to prevent the footage from ever being aired by WXLT. Or any other channel for that matter. Around the time of Chubbuck's funeral, the police tried to return some of her belongings to her mother, including the pistol, which she refused. The firearm, therefore, was retrieved at the police station, and there it remained. As for the tape, there are conflicting accounts about its immediate fate. According to the Sarasota Herald-Tribune newspaper, the police just gave it back to WXLT. However, according to People magazine, they first tried to give the tape to Chris Chubbuck, who, just like with the gun, also refused to keep it, so that's when the police just sent it back to Channel 40. It's not 100% clear what really happened to the tape after it was returned to the TV station. We still know, however, that precisely 1 week after her death, the medical examiners in charge of her autopsy visited WXLT studios to take a look at the footage for professional reasons. The most accepted theory is that, despite the constant pleas of his wife Molly to just drown the tape for good somewhere in the waters of Tampa Bay, the channel owner Bob Nelson decided to preserve it, possibly inside some vault in some dark corner of Channel 40's studios. After his death in 2012, based on the words of his now widow, she turned it over to an undisclosed, very large law firm. Dr. Tampa Bay and Associates, maybe. That's pretty large. Way after the incident, but way before the tape was handed over to this firm, the interest surrounding it bloomed, particularly due to the widespread of that medium none of us can live without currently, the legendary and already mentioned interwebs. It was after its increasing availability to the masses, starting in the late 90s, that we got in contact with both the best and also the worst humanity has to offer. That's how the unfortunate death of Christine Chubbuck was recalled and began being discussed and exploited by a wider audience, especially within those dark corners where people seek the insane, the bizarre, and the macabre. Things reached the next level once people learned about the existence of a recording of the incident, even though its exact whereabouts were and still are unknown. The more the online communities dedicated to hunting for what they labeled as lost media were growing and multiplying, the more the Christine Chubbuck incident, along with the death of Canadian WWE superstar Owen Hart and Australian crocodile hunter Steve Irwin, was being classified as their holy grail of death caught on camera. And this is the third time I'm mentioning a professional wrestler today. Things weren't limited to the internet geeks though, as all this frenzy around Christine Chubbuck had finally reached the Hollywood people. Curiously, within the same year, 2016, two movies about her story would hit the big screen, making her case even more mainstream. These releases weren't, however, met without some resistance on the part of, you guessed it, the remaining family members of Chris, namely her younger brother Greg, who once again tried to prevent these projects from getting the green light, this time unsuccessfully. Here we have, one more time, the male side of the Chubbuck family, believing that not only they had the right to manage Christine's life in terms of her romances, but now also has the right, in terms of her death, controlling what we, the general public, could and should learn about her story. But enough with the ranting and back to the films. One of them, the most popular, was simply titled Christine. Yeah, it was simply titled Christine, but it's not that Christine. Christine is considered the official biopic of Christine Chubbuck, played here by British actress Rebecca Hall. Similarly to so many other biopics, quite a few creative liberties were also taken here in order to let the narrative flow and be more entertaining for the viewers. However, in this particular case, I personally think they just abused them unnecessarily, to the point it seems we are just talking about some different Christine Chubbuck. Nevertheless, the very basic aspects of her later life and death were still maintained and promoted. I'm not claiming in any way, shape or form that this is a bad movie. Quite the opposite actually. The film is good, and Rebecca Hall really seems to have been able to embody the real Christine Chubbuck amazingly, even down to her particular voice tone and mannerisms. But I believe they deviated a lot from her real-life story in a few occasions, as if her life and ultimate death weren't compelling enough to create a motion picture as realistic and faithful to the real thing as possible. The other film, called Kate Plays Christine, took a different approach, adopting the form of what many define as a docudrama. In this case, they came up with a plot where American actress 𝐂𝐇𝐔𝐁 was going to supposedly play Christine Chubbuck in an upcoming biopic and was collecting as much information about her as possible for the role. She was kind of the Rebecca Hall of this parallel universe. Throughout the film, we follow Kate in her search for the essence of Christine Chubbuck. Some real locations related to the life of Christine are shown, and a few people who crossed paths with her are interviewed. This is perhaps the best full-length Christine Chubbuck documentary ever made. After this one, of course, with the release of these two movies, and as fully anticipated, the existence of her videotape reached even more ears, and the never-ending quest for the attainment of its content has grown even more since. But what many are unaware of is that, according to rumor and innuendo, those weren't even the first movies inspired by the Christine Chubbuck incident to be published. Even if we go back as far as the 70s, most precisely just 2 years after Chris's demise, we will find a film also simply titled Network that, according to many, which even includes the Kate Plays Christine documentary, implying it as well. The plot of that movie was inspired by her circumstances, and I can totally understand why. The film depicts the story of a depressed TV news anchor who one day announces during the broadcast that he will take his own life live on TV next Tuesday, in an attempt to take advantage of his true intentions to end his life in order to significantly increase the ratings, thus helping his station before departing for good. But the fact is that, according to the movie production itself, the screenplay was written in 1973, that is, the year before Christine Chubbuck killed herself, which means the rumor is unfounded, and it was all just a huge coincidence. What also seems to be a huge coincidence is that, in 1976 as well, another, way more obscure film was released, and concerning this particular one, there is zero doubt that it contains indeed a scene directly inspired by the Christine Chubbuck incident. The movie is called The Pyramid. No, it's also not that pyramid. The Pyramid. And there is this specific scene where a secondary character ends up doing on a live TV newscast the same Christine did. Even his speech before the shot has a lot in common with Christine's last ever words. Due to possible copyright issues, I won't be playing the sound here, as it contains background music accompanying his speech. So you either have to trust my words, or go watch the movie by yourselves to confirm. Back to modern movies based on Christine Chubbuck, and with the interest in her real footage re-established and widespread, it didn't take long until forged footage of the quote-unquote incident made its way into the online waves, some of it even taken from the movies themselves. They must think we are inattentive individuals or just plain dumb. Still, just mere months after the films were being played in movie theaters, most precisely on the 31st of January 2017, one of those famous top 5 videos was uploaded to YouTube on the Nation Suite channel. In this case, a top 5 of the most bizarre deaths caught on camera, titled Freaky 5 Lost Footage. On the number 1 position, we had none other than CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK's death itself. But what really stands out in this video is that an apparently never seen before clip is shown, one that seems to present real footage of the incident, despite the very blurred image and bad sound quality. After tons of debate in forums, after the content creator of such material just ignored the countless messages asking about how, when and where such footage was obtained and if it was indeed the real deal, never bothering to reply to a single one, and even after the former Suncoast Digest director, Gordon Galbraith, publicly exposed the video as a fake less than 2 weeks later, it was indeed a very good reenactment of the incident, but still fake nonetheless. The legitimacy of such footage is still a topic of discussion to this very day. I would personally just listen to what the show's director has to say on that matter, considering that he was even there that day. But what do I know, right? More recently, another piece of media related to this case also popped up, catching the attention of internet users once again. It was on the 9th of April 2021 that another YouTuber called @DATELESS uploaded a video containing a supposed audio clip taken from the program, where we could listen to the real CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK reading the news and then shooting herself. The original video has since been made publicly unavailable, just like the nation's Squid one, where it was quickly mirrored and re-uploaded by other users in several different places, just like in the prologue of this very video, so it's still fully available out there and pretty easy to find. Once more, and as totally predictable, lots of buzz was generated online. However, this time, and contrary to the previously mentioned recreation, it's consensual that this audio clip is indeed legit. It's uncertain how this audio clip has landed in the wrong hands, let's put it this way, but the most reasonable and accepted theory I also agree with claims that, considering how on that day the testimonies of Christine's co-workers were recorded on cassette in order to then be transcribed on paper, the police took the chance to also record the videotape's audio to cassette to keep it as a piece of evidence that could be easily listened whenever necessary. We can't forget that it's very unlikely that the police could play the master reel on their facilities anyway, due to lack of proper equipment, so this was the easiest approach to take. This is why, toward the end of the recording, we can hear a sound that reminds someone spontaneously sighing in shock, while witnessing the images of Christine shooting herself. Almost certainly one of the police officers. Sometime later, the cassette tape was either copied or even stolen from police custody, and that's how the sound clip ended up in the wild. When he learned about the existence of such an audio clip, Brother Greg once again tried everything to muffle it off the internet world, but was once again unsuccessful, thus accepting defeat and moving on. And this is the videotape status at the moment. The real audio taken from it is out there, but the footage is yet to see the light of day again. Just like no one could imagine the sound would someday resurface, many people are still hopeful about some miracle that will make the footage available for everyone who wishes to witness it. We must, however, realize that it will be way harder to obtain, considering how the reel is strongly locked in an unknown place and that it's half a century old. There is a good chance it might be irreversibly deteriorated to the point of unplayability by now. But there was one tape that didn't cease to run, the tape of the life of everyone who coexisted with CHRISTINE CHUBBUCK and had to move on with their lives. And something tells me you are a bit curious about what was made of them in the years and decades that followed the tragedy. Starting with that kind of love triangle Christine felt involved in, and breaking the usual ladies first rule for editorial purposes. George Peter Ryan would soon leave news broadcasting to dedicate himself to his true passion, acting, especially theater acting, besides also participating in more than 250 radio, voiceover and TV commercials, plus at least one appearance in a full-length movie and a TV series. If he wasn't able to advance any further with his call in life, it wasn't due to lack of talent. He had plenty actually, but rather due to his other true passion, living in the Sarasota area and contributing to the region and its community in any way he could. Ryan would also spend a considerable amount of time in his birth state of New Jersey, and even tried to live for a while in New York City, but the tranquility of his beloved Lido Key, a neighboring island of Christine's Siesta Key, always won him over. He lived there until losing his life in 2005, at the tender age of 60 to pancreatic cancer, with his remains buried in Montclair, New Jersey. There is also another very unusual detail about the life of George Peter Ryan that's more than worth mentioning. And if you think things got crazy, to the point of confusion, regarding the constant jumps of Christine from uni to uni, station to station, we have seen nothing yet, trust me. And I must be the least superstitious person in this entire world, but even I had to admit that something is going on here, in one of the biggest ironies I remember coming across. It has to do with a couple of female names repeatedly present throughout the life of George Peter Ryan. Once again, I promise I will do my best to stay on the right track and not mix up any details, but it won't be easy. After being involved in that pseudo-love triangle, and after Christine was already gone, George will remarry, this time a woman called Andrea Cook. And this definitely proves gorgeous George really had a thing for women called Andrea Kay. And do you know what were her parents' names? Her dad was called Andrew, i.e. the male version of Andrea, and her mom was called, are you ready? Christine. It doesn't end here. In 2003, his aforementioned daughter Christine gave birth to a girl she would name, yes, you got it right, Andrea. And now my head is definitely about to explode once and for all. Oops. Speaking about exploding heads in a video of this nature is really in bad taste. Sorry. We should just go back to the most relevant Andrea in this whole story. Andrea Kirby will definitely become the most well-succeeded element of this former love triangle, at least as far as a pro career is concerned. After moving to Baltimore, she stayed at WJZ-TV for about 4 years before ABC called again, this time not to work for just an affiliate channel, but rather the whole network through the ABC Sports division. There, she resumed her duties as a sports reporter in the popular shows Wild World of Sports and Prudential College Scoreboard between the late 1970s and early 80s. She also got to work for a while outside of her sports element as a hostess of one of those regular morning talk shows between 1980 and 1981 called Good Morning New York on WABC-TV. You know, kinda like Christine. In the end, after all her acquired experience interviewing athletes and sports personalities, Andrea would become a sports media coach in 1985, pretty much enlightening such personalities on how to deal with the media, an activity she is still engaged with nowadays from her home base in Charlotte, North Carolina. Moving on to Christine's closest family members, her older brother Tim, unfortunately, will be the first member to pass away, excluding Chrissy, of course, dying in 1987 at the young age of 45, victimized by some undisclosed illness. There were even a few rumors claiming that he died due to complications related to AIDS. But we can't ignore that, especially back then, the mindset of the time tended to defend that if you were gay and died young in the 80s, it meant without a shadow of a doubt that you had AIDS. Period. Just like early in this decade with the fact that everyone around us who died was dying as a result of the bad disease. No exceptions. As for her parents, Mother Peg will be the first to depart, still in 1994 at 72. Father George got a bit luckier in that regard. Besides marrying and divorcing 3 times throughout his life, he ended his days in Sarasota as well, and passed away at the respectable age of 96 in 2015. This leaves us with her younger brother Greg, the only closest family member currently still alive. So naturally, he is now the only one being called once in a while to do interviews or comment about something related to her sister and how he truly thinks she should be remembered. Or take action when some forbidden material pops out. And speaking of how Christine Chubbuck should be remembered, I think this is the perfect time to conclude this already extensive video. reflecting on this exact aspect. But let me tell you right away that I'm the carrier of bad news for her brother Greg Chubbuck. Assuredly, both Greg and the rest of the crowd who had the privilege of interacting with her and liked her, not to mention those who regularly watched Suncoast Digest on those sunny weekday mornings and were familiar with Christine Chubbuck, would love to know that she would be remembered for her contributions to society, for her professional zeal, for her commitment to social causes, and for her crescent concern regarding the crescent, bloody and gutsy direction the media was taking towards sensationalism. I feel, however, compelled to remind you that we live in a somewhat selfish and even cruel world, where, as the saying goes, facts don't care about your feelings. For better or for worse, whether fair or unfair, the facts clearly show that for the mere mortals who never got to meet Christine Chubbuck in person, nor had the chance to develop some sort of a true emotional connection with her, they will always remember Christine Chubbuck not for her stupendous career as a journalist. She didn't allow herself to reach that level. Although I firmly believe she is the perfect example of what could have been case had she just been able to be more patient and deal properly with her mental health issues. Not for having built a family and giving birth to someone who changed the world. She died single and virgin, nor for changing the world herself with her humanitarian actions on a global scale. For mere mortals without those emotional bonds, 99.999 etc% of the population. And as lamentable as it surely sounds, the only eventful thing Christine Chubbuck ever accomplished in her life, and that truly contributed to us being here half a century later still talking about her, releasing movies and documentaries about her, multiplying threads in message boards discussing her, and wishing that someday someone can locate and gain access to the legendary reel in order to open the gates of hell, is due to one event and one event only. The one that took place on Monday, the 15th of July 1974 at 9:38 in 4725 Lawton Drive, Sarasota, Florida, USA. Please allow me to briefly bring to this analysis my previous video about Ian Curtis, the frontman of the post-punk band Joy Division, in order to establish a comparison that I think is really important to bring up. And if you haven't watched that video yet, I recommend you do so after finishing this one. In that video, I made it really clear throughout it that there was a clear distinction that could be traced between Ian Curtis the human, that is the husband, father, social worker, and simply a common man within the British middle-class society, and Ian Curtis the myth, that is the lyricist of love and despair, the energetic artist, and ultimately the martyr of the Gothic cause. We can also draw a similar parallel between Ian Curtis and Christine Chubbuck in the sense that it's also easy to come up with a clear distinction between one Christine Chubbuck the human and one Christine Chubbuck the myth. Conversely, there is also a huge distinction that can be established here. Whereas, despite having lasted for just a couple of years, Ian Curtis the human and Ian Curtis the myth were able to coexist side by side and enter in successive conflicts with one another. The same can't be said about Christine Chubbuck. Ironically, Christine Chubbuck the myth was only born at the exact moment Christine Chubbuck the human had departed from this world. Okay, technically, it can be said that they coexisted for 14 hours. But please don't ruin my poetic moment. And it was only Christine Chubbuck the myth who opened the door for our potential interest in Christine Chubbuck the human. And for the vast majority, regrettably, only Christine Chubbuck the myth really matters. Even after people like me and others have decided to roll up our sleeves and go to work by producing content about Christine Chubbuck that tries as hard as possible to humanize her as much as possible, in an attempt to drive as many people as possible into learning about her compelling life story. Did it work? At least we tried. The purest of truth is that, whether we like it or not, her life story will be forever inseparable from the abundant stain of blood she shed over the Newswatch desk. Even if planet Earth stops spinning tomorrow, CHRISTINE CHUBBUck will still be primarily remembered for the sinister way she entered its history. CHRISTINE CHUBBUck is far from being, lamentably, the only news anchor to have taken her own life. The difference is that all others who chose to do so made it in the privacy of their own pain, whilst Christine was the only one who chose to share her personal agony with her general audience. CHRISTINE CHUBBUck wasn't even the only news reporter being fatally shot on live television. The most similar situation to hers happened in August 2015, when another female reporter and her cameraman were mortally wounded by one of their former co-workers while they were conducting an outdoor interview that was airing live on some morning show. But the fundamental difference, of course, is that, in this case, the shots weren't self-inflicted, thus making her the only journalist doing it to herself on live TV. If we claim she was the only person ever committing the S-word live on TV, we would be lying or just wrong. Others would follow, even in more shocking and impactful ways. But CHRISTINE CHUBBUck will forever be a part of history as the very first doing so. Let's leave behind what we believe her family and friends wished regarding the way CHRISTINE CHUBBUck should be forever remembered, and let's concentrate on what truly matters to wrap things up. What I mean is trying to figure out what Christine herself was trying to accomplish with all of this. The truth is that she elaborated a plan that was almost conducted to perfection toward her primary goal. She was able to obtain the weapon under the pretext of being working on a piece about the S-word and firearms. She was able to leave this world on the exact day she decided to, although she was just 50 minutes apart from the following day. She was able to report on her own S-word attempt and have it read almost ad verbum on several newscasts on different stations and printed publications across the country. She was able to make some people express their disgust in relation to the dirty tactics media use quite often in their shameless seeking for sensationalism. She was able to raise more awareness amongst many people regarding mental health issues previously ignored. The plan only shied away from perfection due to two failures. The first one being a petty one, but the second being one she was certainly not contemplating at all. One that was so serious it almost made her ultimate plan fail miserably, rather than being almost perfect. One that is almost up there with having just survived the attempt. The petty one has to do with the film reel that jammed, which contained the restaurant shootout footage and was supposed to be shown during this last ever newscast of hers. Had the previously recorded film footage of blood and guts not failed to be shown, it would become an even greater compliment to what we were about to witness next live from the studio, making the whole deal look even more dramatic and gory. Now, what really ruined the plot to some degree has to do with what Christine was expecting to happen as a result of her actions and ended up not materializing at all. After witnessing so many instances of how TV stations knew no scruples when it came to airing bloody and violent footage on our little screens, she was convinced the same would happen with her own footage. Independently of her poor mental state at the time, CHRISTINE CHUBBUck really wished the greatest number of people possible could watch such footage, get impressed by it, get shocked, get moved, and feel a flood of emotions that would cause controversy and debate for years to come. As we know, that wasn't what happened at all. Although I kind of implied it at the beginning of this video to some degree, I don't truly defend the theory claiming that the key reason why CHRISTINE CHUBBUck did what she eventually did was out of protest against the blood and guts issue. She valued her life way too much to sacrifice it as a simple act of protest. I also don't support the theory that CHRISTINE CHUBBUck simply took her own life because she couldn't get laid. That's a very simplistic and reducing way to look at the issue, I would say. And I defend even less the theory that CHRISTINE CHUBBUck certainly armed with the greatest premonitory skills amongst everyone, did it in order to become a huge lost media legend on the internet. During Christine's days, that young medium in its first stages of development was still circumscribed to the Pentagon, and I really doubt she had even known about it. The ultimate reason why she went away the way she did was only of her own knowledge, at best. She was the only one who possibly knew what was going through her head. The only thing we can be sure to know going through her head was that wicked woodcutter bullet, nothing else. But we can always opine. We are entitled to. And by the way, I'd love to hear your opinion. As for my personal one, Christine Chubbuck did what she did for a reason that can be simple and complex all at once. Because she was just one more of those many, many, many tortured souls out there. Thanks for watching, and until next time, if I feel like it.